Please subscribe to this channel for more videos related to Catholic Christian teaching. In the fourth episode on the Catholic perspective on faith and works, we talked about becoming divinely perfect as God the Father is perfect, and in performing of good deeds as the criterion of salvation. We understand that it is in Jesus that we entrust our efforts and participate in His salvific mission. It is with Jesus that we can do the impossible. In the biblical passages that describe salvation in terms of a reward, we know that the language is only fully comprehensible when it is understood against the backdrop of the Jewish worldview, out of which Christianity emerges. In ancient Judaism, sins and good deeds were closely tied to economic terminology. As scholars have long recognized, the idea that sin constituted a debt pervades Jewish literature. The most famous passage in the New Testament reflecting this understanding is found in the Lord's Prayer. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. As is universally acknowledged, sins are here described in terms of debts. The same idea is found in other places in the New Testament. For example, the parable of the unforgiven servant, where the handling of debt is clearly related to the concept of sin. This kind of commercial terminology permeates the New Testament. Jesus, for instance, explains that His death provides the ransom needed for salvation, that is, the cost of redemptions. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. St. Paul describes the way every sin has its price. The wages of sin is death. In Colossians, Christ has saved us by canceling the debt of our indebtedness by His death on the cross. Having cancelled the bond which stood against us with its legal demands, this He set aside, nailing it to the cross. This kind of language only makes sense in a Jewish context. Matthew's version of the Our Father makes sense only if we assume that the wording reflects an underlying Semitic idiom. Indeed, looking at ancient Jewish texts, we do in fact find sin described along these lines. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, we see the covenant infidelity of Israel described along these lines. The first members of the covenant fell into debt. They were given over to the sword. They had forsaken the covenant of God and chose their own will. Given that sins were understood in terms of debts, it is not surprising to find a corollary. Good deeds were viewed as a reimbursement. One of the earliest texts suggesting this perspective is in the book of Proverbs. He who is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and He will repay him for his deed. Here it is understood that performing good deeds will lead to divine repayment. The books of Tobit and Sirach reveal that by the 1st century, such ideas were more fully developed. In these books, the credit earned by good deeds is represented by the image of the heavenly treasures of sorts. For if you do what is true, your ways will prosper through your deeds. Give alms from your possessions to all who live uprightly, and do not let your eye begrudge the gift when you make it. Do not turn your face away from any poor man, and the face of God will not be turned away from you. If you have many possessions, make your gift from them in proportion. If few, do not be afraid to give according to the little you have. So you will be laying up a good treasure for yourself against the day of necessity. For charity delivers from death and keeps you from entering the darkness. And for all who practice it, charity is an excellent offering in the presence of the Most High. Help a poor man for the commandment's sake, and because of his need, do not send him away empty. Lose your silver for the sake of a brother or friend, and do not let it rust under a stone and be lost. Lay up your treasure according to the commandments of the Most High, and it will profit you more than gold. Store up almsgiving in your treasury, and it will rescue you from all affliction. More than a mighty shield and more than a heavy spear, it will fight on your behalf against your enemy. Moreover, Sirach tells us that it is not only almsgiving that builds up credit in one's treasury, but other good deeds as well. Whoever honors his father atones for sins, and whoever glorifies his mother is like one who lays up treasure. For kindness to a father will not be forgotten, and against your sins it will be credited to you. In the day of your affliction it will be remembered in your favor. As frost in fair weather, your sins will melt away. By the 1st century, the idea that good deeds earn credit was clearly linked to entry into life with God after death. That is, salvation from ultimate death. The prize to be won is viewed ultimately not as earthly life, but supernatural life. In the Book of Wisdom, those who have died experience a blessed afterlife, described as the wages of holiness. Similarly, Psalms of Solomon explains the one who does righteousness treasures up life for himself with the Lord. Not surprisingly then, the final judgment is often described in Jewish sources with imagery reminiscent of the marketplace scales. Such works describe how one's good and evil deeds are weighed against each other. Salvation depends on which weighs more heavily, one's good deeds or bad deeds. Please go to YouTube Retirementality channel, playlists, Apologetics for the complete series of these materials.